Hey guys, thanks for tuning in at our repair shop series here at Pronto Environmental. Just for the record, I'm not a mechanic. What we actually do is we specialize in sewer system maintenance and 24-hour emergency service. What you see right here is just kind of like a weekend project to repair the rear differential out of this Kenworth heavy spec vac truck. Oh, it's come out of a tandem axle, heavy spec Kenworth. Quite the heavy piece. The first step was to pull the axle shafts back. One of the brake pots was in the way, so we had to remove that. And there's the axle housing, and the small hole in the back is for the output shaft that goes to the rear differential. The thing is that the stand is necessary to have to be able to hold this diff upright, because this power divider input shaft is so heavy that the only way to put it back in is to use an engine hoist. The other thing was to weld up a tool like this to be able to hold the yoke while cranking on this nut with a huge bar to be able to loosen it up. And the third biggest challenge that we had was to find big enough sockets to fit these nuts. This one here is a 2" and 5/16. Hopefully you won't need that if you're only working on the power divider, because it's for the pinion nut. And the other one is a 2" and 1/4 for the yoke nut. So there's apparently a flat spot on the helical gear that has to be lined up for clearance in order for this thing to slide up. And it is possible to damage things if those two flat spots aren't lined up. Okay, correction, that's not on the helical gear. It's on the spider gear nest. There's a flat spot here and another one on the other side. And basically there's another gear in here that will snag unless it's lined up perfectly. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It's amazing that I had time to make this video this weekend, but there was one last part that I ended up having to order because I didn't want to put all this back together and have some issues. So since we got some time, let's take it apart. This here just sits in the back of the differential case. There's a bearing. It's called the side gear. The spider gear nest is held onto the input shaft by a snap ring just on top of here. There it is. That's how that spins. This is the helical gear. And there's a thrust washer in between the helical gear and the differential input shaft. And this is the part that I'm actually waiting on right now. And of course all the stores are closed on the weekend, so we're gonna have to wait till Monday. We could probably get away with putting it back together like this, but I've already spent so much money on parts on this on this input shaft here that I'm not going to risk it over something that cost, you know, 20 bucks. But as you can see, there's some pitting. Like right there. And I just don't feel comfortable putting everything back together like this. I guess we'll just have to wait a couple days. And there's one more bearing. This is called the oil pump. This pumps oil through the system. And inside of here, there is one more bearing, which is kind of hard to show you right now because I would have to take all these bolts apart and it's just too time consuming. Everything's already been torqued. So you'll just have to take my word for that. And what I'm going to do is I'll put this thing back together and then we can talk about some of the carnage that took place inside of here. Some of the extra parts that we have to buy. Okay. The other thing is, don't quote me on that, but this little groove here is for oil to get past it. There's also 2 oil holes in the middle of the shaft. And as far as I understand by reading the instructions on the Rockwell website, this little groove is supposed to point down like that. But that'll be double checked at the parts store Monday. There you go. Okay, just like that. So let's talk about the parts. Now I don't know what caused this. Probably a driver with a very, very heavy foot, or just very little common sense of how to drive a big rig. And there must have been shock load going to the drivetrain. And this thing took a beating. So the drive shaft from the transmission comes to here. This goes into the diff. And then another drive shaft comes out of here into the rear diff. And that's what happened to it. There was a lot of play. When I went under the truck, I grabbed onto the drive shaft and I was able to wiggle it up and down about 1/4 inch. And so that's why we decided to take everything apart and fix it before parts scatter all across the road. Okay, so this is a differential input shaft. Ended up costing close to 500 bucks Canadian. Naturally, this side gear, I believe they call it a side gear, that sits right there, also took a beating. So that was 180 bucks. Obviously threw in some bearings and some new seals. And the one thing that I almost missed, and our shop manager Dan pointed out, these spider gears have little thrust washers on them. And he noticed that it's got chunks missing out of it. Of course, this thing is super heavy. Okay, this part right here was 420 bucks. Just for practice, let's put this thing back in here one more time. It's good to do things like this a couple times over and over, because every time you learn something, right? Okay, just like that. That's all there is to it. So thank you for watching, and if you take one thing away from this video, just remember one thing. Big trucks, big money, both in and out. Thanks very much. See you later.